Frankfurt, September 1945. The city was not a city, but a corpse in the advanced stages of decay. A fine, greasy ash hung in the air, a perpetual fog of pulverized brick, bone, and dreams. It coated the tongue, gritted between teeth, and filled the lungs with the taste of absolute ruin. In the skeletal remains of the city center, one building stood with a mocking semblance of integrity, the former headquarters of the Dresdner Finanzbank. Its neoclassical facade was scarred by shellfire, but its vault, a monstrous cube of steel and concrete, had swallowed the inferno and remained sealed. Target Alpha 6 on the Allied inventory list. Inside, the air was cold and still, thick with the smell of damp paper, ozone from frayed wires, and something faintly metallic, perhaps the ghost of blood, perhaps just rust. Captain Jacob Miller, 26, moved through the grand, shattered lobby with the deliberate slowness of a sleepwalker. His uniform was too crisp against the backdrop of devastation. A former economic analyst for the Treasury, his mind was a machine built for patterns, for the hidden logic of numbers and systems. The Army had given him a uniform and a vague title, but his real mission here, among the ghosts of high finance, felt like a return to his true nature. He was to find the physical treasure, gold bars, currency reserves, bullion, the tangible spoils of war. But as his team of soldiers, boys with hard eyes and loud boots, carted out crates of Reichsmarks and ledgers, filled with the mundane arithmetic of a collapsed regime, Miller's attention drifted. His gaze was pulled to the offices on the mezzanine level, the executive suites, places where decisions were made not about petty cash, but about the flow of empires. He climbed the skeletal marble staircase, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. The door to the managing director's office was ajar, hanging from one hinge. The room inside was a snapshot of sudden departure. A crystal decanter, empty, sat on a sideboard. A portrait of Hitler lay face down in a corner, its glass shattered. And behind the massive oak desk, its leather scorched by a stray ember, stood a wall of elegant, dark wood filing cabinets. One drawer was open, its lock neatly drilled out by a military engineer days before. Miller approached. The official report stated, "Cabinet inspected. Contained personal correspondence and non-essential commercial records." But Miller's eyes, trained to see the anomaly, caught it immediately. The cabinet's interior depth, judged by the side panels, was at least 6 inches shallower than the external frame. A false back. His heart, a steady metronome until now, gave a single hard thump. He called for a pry bar. The sound of splintering wood was obscenely loud in the silent building. As the thin panel gave way, it revealed not a hidden compartment of jewels or gold coins, but a single flat portfolio case of fine, black leather. It was unmarked, cool to the touch, and utterly devoid of dust. He laid it on the burnt desk and opened the clasp. Inside were not stacks of currency, but perhaps 24 sheets of parchment-like paper. The first was a diagram, drawn with the precision of an architect or a military strategist, a network of lines connecting Zurich, Bern, Buenos Aires, Istanbul, and Tangier. At each node, not names, but codes, SV4, Falk, IG Norn. It was a map, but a map of something fluid and invisible, a circulatory system for capital. The subsequent pages were lists, column after column of alphanumeric sequences he recognized as international patent registrations. Verfahren zur katalytischen Synthese von Polymeren, a process for synthetic polymers. Präzisionslager für gyroskopische Stabilisierung, gyroscopic bearings. Schablone für optische Zielerfassung. Optical targeting templates. Then lists of corporate entities, holding companies in Liechtenstein, bearer share certificates for Swiss arms manufacturers, shipping manifests for neutral flagged vessels. Miller's breath fogged in the cold air. This was not a bank record. This was a last will and testament of an industrial empire, a blueprint for its own resurrection in exile. The true treasure of the Reich wasn't in its vaults, it was in its mind. And this was the mind, captured on paper, trying to flee. A soft crunch of plaster under a boot heel. Miller did not startle. He went perfectly still, his hand instinctively sliding the first patent list beneath the diagram. He turned, his body blocking the view of the desk. A man stood in the doorway. He was not one of Miller's soldiers. He wore a well-cut but worn trench coat over a civilian suit. His hair was steel gray, his face lean and weathered, with the calm, assessing eyes of a hunter. He held a German Luger P08 pistol, not pointed at Miller, but held loosely, casually at his side. It was the casualness that was most threatening. "You are a curious man, Captain," the man said in accentless English. His voice was a low rasp, like stone on stone. "Most of them, they look for the shiny things, the heavy things. You look for the ghosts." "Who are you?" Miller asked, his own voice sounding unnaturally calm. He kept his posture relaxed, non-confrontational. His mind raced. Soviet Smersh? A leftover SS watchdog. "A concerned party," the man said, taking a step into the room. His eyes flickered past Miller to the open portfolio on the desk. "You found the Sonderfonds, the special fund. It does not belong to your army." "It doesn't belong to anyone," Miller said. "It's evidence." The man offered a thin, humorless smile. "Evidence, a good word. Evidence of what? Of genius? Of sin? Of opportunity?" He took another step. "That portfolio is a key, Captain. A key to many locks. Some of those locks are here, in Europe. Some are in your own country, in boardrooms you will never see. And some," he paused, his gaze locking onto Miller's, "are in Moscow. They want this key too. They have men here, in this city, right now, less polite than me." The threat hung in the air, more palpable than the ash outside. This was no longer an archaeological dig. It was an active battlefield. "What do you want?" Miller asked. "I want you to understand the value of what you hold," the man said. "And I want to make you an offer before others make you one you cannot refuse." Before Miller could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and authoritative. "The only offer on the table is his surrender, and he's about 30 years too late for that." A figure emerged from the shadows behind the man in the doorway. It was Carter Rhine, an OSS officer whose file was a masterpiece of redaction. He held a Colt M11811, its barrel aimed steadily at the center of the stranger's back. Rhine's face was all sharp angles and cool detachment. He looked at the stranger, then at Miller, and finally at the open portfolio. His eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, not with surprise, but with profound recognition. The German did not turn. He sighed, a sound of deep weariness. "Rhine, I should have known the vultures would send their best." "Drop the weapon, Klaus," Rhine said, his tone conversational. "You're a businessman now. Let's not make this messy." The man, Klaus, hesitated. His eyes darted to the portfolio, then to the window, calculating odds that were rapidly dwindling. With a slow, deliberate movement, he bent and placed the Luger on the floor. "Smart," Rhine said. He stepped forward, kicked the Luger away, and without looking, addressed Miller. "Captain, secure that case. every single page. As Miller carefully closed the portfolio, his fingers trembling slightly now with the adrenaline crash, Rhine kept his gun on Klaus. "You're going to walk out of here, Klaus. You're going to tell your former friends in the Odessa network and your new friends in the Soviet Purchasing Commission that the file is gone, vaporized, that the trail is cold." Klaus's face tightened. "They will not believe me." "Then that is your problem," Rhine said flatly. "The alternative is I hand you over to the French resistance cell 2 blocks from here. I hear they have a very final way of dealing with their concerned parties. Your choice." A silent communication passed between the two men, a history of other rooms, other deals, in the gray spaces of the war. Klaus gave a curt, bitter nod. He straightened his coat, gave Miller one last, unreadable look, and walked out of the room, his footsteps fading down the hall. The moment he was gone, the atmosphere shifted. The immediate threat dissolved, but a heavier, more complex pressure took its place. Rhine holstered his pistol and strode to the desk. He didn't ask permission. He opened the portfolio and began to scan the pages. Miller watched him. Rhine's expression was that of a master jeweler, appraising a flawless stone. "Do you know what this is, Miller?" Rhine asked, not looking up. "I have an idea, sir. It's a financial and intellectual escape route." Rhine finally looked at him. "It's a weapon, more potent than any V-2 rocket. This," he tapped a patent for high-grade industrial lubricants, "could decide who dominates machine production for a decade. This," he pointed to a holding company in Argentina, "is a pipeline that could fund an entire covert intelligence network without ever touching the U.S. Treasury." He closed the case with a soft, definitive click. "Your army is looking for the past, the gold, the paintings, its nostalgia. This is the future, and it's lying here unclaimed. We have to report it," Miller said, the protocol ingrained in him. "To the Scientific and Technical Commission, to the committees?" Rhine interrupted, a flash of impatience in his eyes. "Who will bury it in bureaucracy for 5 years, while the Soviets pick apart the pieces we leave on the table? No, Captain. We don't report this. We control it." The word hung in the air. Control. It was a declaration of a different kind of war. "That man, Klaus, he said the Soviets are looking for this," Miller said, the reality settling in. "Of course they are," Rhine said, moving to the window, peering out at the ruined cityscape. "This is the new front line, Miller. Not trenches and tanks. Shadows and bank accounts. We just captured a hill made of patents and shell companies, and now we have to hold it." He turned back, his gaze intense. "I need you, not the soldier, but the economist, the pattern recognizer. I'm forming a unit, no official name, no lines on an org chart. Our mission will be to follow this map, to find every asset, every patent, every hidden account on this list, and secure it. Not for a museum, for an arsenal. An arsenal for the conflict that's already begun. We'll call it Operation Iron Stash. Because this isn't pirate gold. It's the cold, hard, structural steel for everything we'll need to build." Miller looked from Rhine's resolute face to the black portfolio. It seemed to pulse with a dark energy. He thought of Klaus's warning, of the unseen Soviet teams searching the same ashes. To walk away was to return to the mundane inventory lists. To say yes was to step into the shadow world Rhine described, a world with its own rules, its own morality, its own mortal dangers. He had felt the touch of that danger just minutes ago. He saw not just the diagrams, but the consequences. The patents becoming machines, the companies becoming fronts, the money becoming power, unaccountable, invisible power. He was being offered the keys to a kingdom that didn't officially exist. The ash was still falling outside the broken window, a silent, gray snow. In the distance, the clang of a truck gate broke the silence. Down in the courtyard, GIs were loading a truck with heavy, iron-bound boxes. Bullion. The sound was solid, final. Another truck stood nearby, its cargo being carefully loaded by Rhine's own quieter men. Filing cabinets, document boxes, and now, a single black leather portfolio. Miller understood the choice. One truck carried the weight of the past. The other carried the blueprint for the future. A future he could either witness or help shape. He met Rhine's expectant gaze. "What do you need me to do first?" Jacob Miller asked. His voice did not waver. In that moment he crossed an invisible border. He left the world of reports and regulations behind and stepped into the silent, decisive war of Iron Stash. The taste of ash in his mouth was no longer just the taste of ruin. It was the taste of ignition. Zurich, November 1945. The silence here was of a different order than in Frankfurt. It was the deep velvet hush of preserved wealth, of discretion bought and paid for over centuries. The conference room on the top floor of the Handelsbank AG overlooked the pristine glacial lake, a view of breathtaking, sterile beauty. Jacob Miller felt profoundly out of place in his new, ill-fitting civilian suit. He was no longer Captain Miller. According to his documents, he was James Marlowe, a representative of Atlantic Recovery Associates. The lie felt like a pebble in his shoe. The unit, now officially designated Group Delta, and known only to a select few in the nascent Central Intelligence Group, operated from a nondescript townhouse in Washington's Georgetown. But its true theater was here, in the neutral heart of Europe. Carter Rhine had assembled a team of ghosts. There was Elsa Werner, a former German Jewish banker who had fled Berlin in '38. Her mind a living index of every financial trick and hidden clause the Reich's elite had ever used. Her knowledge was a weapon, and her motivation was a cold, focused hatred, channeled not into revenge, but into reclamation. There was Thomas Shaw, a British ex-SOE commando with a talent for physical persuasion and an unsettling calmness that spoke of operations in darkened alleys across the continent. And there was Arthur Lenz, a corpulent, chain-smoking, former ARS forensic accountant, who could follow a money trail through a maze of shell companies like a bloodhound. Miller was the strategist, the connective tissue. His job was to see the grand pattern Elsa's details and Arthur's numbers revealed. Their first target was the Handelsbank, specifically Safe Deposit Box 447. According to the portfolio's map, it was a nexus point controlled by the code SV4. Their intelligence, pieced from interrogations and captured letters, suggested it contained not cash, but the foundational documents for the C-Handle Trust, bearer bonds, master lists of shareholders, and the legal transfer documents for a dozen patents, all awaiting a surviving signatory. Rhine's plan was not to break in, it was to become the rightful owners. "This is Dr. Heinrich Vogel," Elsa said, sliding a photograph across the polished mahogany table. The man in the picture was in his 60s, stern, with the eyes of a raptor. Former board member of IG Farben, chief architect of their foreign asset concealment structure. He is in a detention camp near Heidelberg. He is also SV4. "He's the key to the box," Miller stated.
"He's more than a key," Elsa replied, her voice icy. "He is the lock, the box, and the combination. Under Swiss law, without his direct, verifiable authorization or proof of his death, the box is a tomb. The bank will not yield. They have their reputation." Shaw, cleaning his fingernails with a stiletto knife, spoke without looking up. "So we get his authorization. Persuasive sort, is he?" "We don't need to touch him," Rhines said, leaning back in his chair. He nodded to Arthur Lenz. "Arthur?" Lenz stubbed out his cigarette and opened a slim dossier. "Dr. Vogel has a son, Klaus Vogel, 22 years old. Last confirmed sighting. His Wehrmacht unit surrendered to American forces in the Ruhr in April. He is currently unaccounted for. Presumed by his father to be either dead or in a Soviet camp." Lenz looked up, his eyes magnified behind thick glasses. The father's greatest vulnerability is not his own skin. It's the fate of his boy. Miller felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "We're going to find his son?" "We already have," Rhines said. "He's in a POW processing camp in Bavaria. Healthy, scared, eager to go home. We are going to be the angels who reunite a grieving father with his lost son. In exchange for his grateful cooperation, of course." The operation was clinical. Shaw extracted Klaus Vogel from the camp with forged transfer orders. Miller, playing the compassionate American officer, delivered him to a safe house near Heidelberg. The reunion with his father, arranged in a stark interrogation room with the pretense of a humanitarian gesture, was a performance of raw, manipulated emotion. The old man wept, his stern facade shattered. Miller watched, his role as benefactor tasting like ash. The next day, presented with documents granting Atlantic Recovery Associates full power of attorney over all his Swiss holdings, in gratitude for the safe return of my son, Dr. Vogel signed. His hand shook, but he signed. The alternative, his son disappearing back into the Soviet zone, remained unspoken, but hung in the air, thicker than smoke. 24 hours later, Miller and Elsa sat in the office of the Handelsbank's director, Herr Steinmann. The man was a monument to Swiss neutrality, his face impassive as a cliff. He examined Vogel's signatures, the notarized documents, with glacial slowness. "This is in order," he conceded, a hint of reluctance in his voice. "However, the procedures for such a transfer are complex. There will be a mandatory holding period. Inquiries must be made." This was the expected resistance. Elsa leaned forward. "Herr Steinmann," she said in flawless, cultured German, "we understand procedure. We also understand that in March of 1943, this bank facilitated the transfer of 4.2 million Swiss francs to an account in Lisbon, codenamed Weserübung. That transaction violated your own country's agreements with the Allies. It was, shall we say, overly accommodating to the previous regime." She placed a single sheet of paper on his desk, a transaction record Lenz had reconstructed from Vogel's notes. "We are not here to cause difficulties for the bank. We are here for one box. In exchange, this record, and our memory of it, disappears." Steinmann's mask of neutrality cracked. A faint sheen of perspiration appeared on his temples. He looked from Elsa's steely gaze to Miller's blank one. The silence stretched. He was weighing the sanctity of a single deposit box against the catastrophic scandal of exposed collaboration. Without another word, he picked up his phone and issued a quiet command. In the vault, under the cold fluorescent light and the watchful eye of a bank guard, safe deposit box 447 was opened.
There were no stacks of gold. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes. The first contained bearer bonds from U.S. Steel and Standard Oil, worth millions. The second held the complete notarized patent registrations for synthetic fuel catalysts. The third was a simple ledger, listing account numbers in Buenos Aires, and the names of the lawyers who controlled them. As Miller placed the envelopes into his briefcase, he felt no triumph, only a hollow chill. They had won. They had used a father's love as a crowbar and blackmail as a lubricant. This was the silent war Rhine had promised. It was dirty, efficient, and left no visible scars. Their celebration at the safe house was subdued. Shaw poured whiskey. Lenz catalogued the bonds. Elsa stared at the patent documents, her expression unreadable. Rhine raised his glass to the first brick in our new foundation. Before Miller could lift his, the door to the safe house, a heavy reinforced thing, splintered inward with a deafening crash. The world erupted into noise and movement. A man in a dark overcoat burst in, a Soviet PPSH-41 submachine gun in his hands. He wasn't alone. 2 others followed. Shaw was already moving, his pistol clearing its holster before the first assailant could level his weapon. The roar of gunfire filled the confined space. Miller hit the floor, the briefcase with the envelopes clamped to his chest. He saw Elsa diving behind the sofa, Lenz scrambling under the table. Rhine didn't flinch. He stood, drew his Colt, and fired twice. The first Soviet agent crumpled. Shaw took a second one down with a shot to the neck. The third man wounded fired a wild burst that shattered the window overlooking the lake before Shaw silenced him. The silence that followed was ringing, acrid with cordite and the copper smell of blood. Shaw was already at the door, checking the hall. Clear, for now. Miller got to his knees, his ears buzzing. One of the Soviets, the one Rhine had shot, was still alive, gasping wetly on the expensive Persian rug. Rhine walked over, knelt beside him, ignoring the blood pooling on the wool. "Who sent you?" Rhine asked in Russian, his voice calm. The man spat, a weak, bloody spray. "Budushchai prinadlejit nam," he whispered. "The future belongs to us." Then his eyes glazed over. Rhine stood up, wiping his hands on a handkerchief. His face was hard. "They're not just hunting for the same lists. They're hunting for us now. They know the team." Elsa emerged, her hands shaking slightly. She looked at the dead men, then at Miller, clutching the briefcase. "This is the cost," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is the real currency." Miller looked at the envelopes in his case, then at the bodies on the floor. The bearer bonds were stained with invisible blood. The patents were now instruments of a hot war fought in cold rooms. The silent network had just screamed. Rhine surveyed the scene, the broken door, the shattered window, the dead. "Clean this up. We're done in Zurich. The trail leads south next, to Argentina." He looked at Miller. "You still think this is about finance, Miller? This is a shooting war, and we just took our first casualties." Outside, the serene waters of Lake Zurich glittered under a cold sun, oblivious. Inside, Jacob Miller understood. Every asset they recovered would now be paid for not just with cunning, but with blood. The iron stash was no longer an abstract concept. It was a battlefield, and he was now a combatant. Buenos Aires, June 1946. The Southern Hemisphere winter was a damp, mild deception. The city throbbed with a frenetic post-war energy, a tango of desperation and newfound arrogance. Grand Avenida, lined with decaying European elegance, was a mask. The real power flowed in the back rooms of private clubs and on the vast, silent estates of the Pampas. Here, the shadows of the vanished Reich grew long and substantial. Jacob Miller felt the distance from the ruins of Frankfurt like a physical weight. Here there was no ash, only the slick polish of marble and the sweet, cloying scent of night-blooming jasmine, masking a deeper rot. Group Delta operated from a secure villa in the Palermo district, its walls lined with listening devices and its windows bulletproof. The near disaster in Zurich had forged them into a tighter, harder unit. Paranoia was their sixth member. Their target was Bureau Concordia, a shipping import-export front operated by a man named Dieter Koch. According to the ledger from the Zurich box, Koch was the paymaster, the funnel through which funds from the Swiss accounts were channeled to a network of safe houses, identity forgers, and nascent business ventures for high-ranking Nazis in hiding.
He was the practical architect of the rat line, but Carter Rhine had a grander, more dangerous design. "We don't cut off the funnel," he told the team in the villa's map room. A large chart showed Koch's known connections spidering across South America. "We redirect it. We take over his operation. We control the rat line. Then we decide who gets a new life and what they pay for it." Miller stared at him. "You want to work with them? Fund them." "Not fund them," Rhine corrected, his eyes cold. "Own them. Koch's network is a precision tool. We can use it to exfiltrate our own assets from Eastern Europe, to insert agents, to launder operational funds for the entire agency. Imagine it. A self-financing, self-cleaning intelligence pipeline, built by the Nazis for their own survival, now working for us." He turned to the map. "But to own the tool, we need to own the mechanic. We need Dieter Koch." Elsa Werner, her face paler and sharper since Zurich, spoke. "He will not be persuaded like Vogel. He has no family to leverage. His loyalty is to the cause and to his own survival." "Then we offer him a better version of both," Rhine said. The plan was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Shaw and his local contacts, ex-OSS men now running shady import businesses, established surveillance. They learned Koch's routines, his favorite cafe on Corrientes, his visits to a discreet tailor, his mistress in Recoleta. He was a careful man, but he had a vice. He felt untouchable in his new kingdom. Miller, under the guise of a Canadian mineral rights investor, engineered a chance meeting at the Café Tortoni. He was all naive enthusiasm and new money. Koch, a wiry man with the eyes of a tax auditor, was cautiously amused. Miller dangled a proposition about speculative tungsten mines in Bolivia, a deal requiring complex international transfers. He played the perfect pigeon. Over a week of lunches and expensive brandies, a twisted rapport formed. Miller fed Koch just enough legitimate-seeming business to whet his appetite. Meanwhile, Lenz, working from coded numbers in the ledger, performed forensic magic. He traced a specific payment from Koch's main account to a bank in Valparaiso, Chile. The beneficiary was a name that made even Rhine freeze: Friedrich Schiller, an alias for a man they knew from intelligence briefings as a former Gestapo lieutenant colonel specializing in interrogations in occupied Poland. "Koch isn't just moving money," Lenz announced, smoke curling from his cigarette. "He's on the payroll of a war criminal. He's funding a specific monster." Rhine saw not a moral crisis, but the perfect lever. "We don't confront Koch with it. We give the information to the right people and then save him from the consequences." They arranged a masterpiece of staged chaos. As Koch left his mistress's apartment one foggy night, a black sedan screeched to a halt. Men speaking rough Spanish,
actually Shaw's team, spilled out, shouting about Interpol and extradition for crimes against humanity. They shoved a terrified Coke into the car. It was a violent, convincing kidnapping. He awoke in a dim, concrete-lined room in the basement of their villa, a stage dressed as a covert detention center. Miller entered, no longer the naive Canadian, but as a grim, official American. "Your friends in Valparaiso talked, Herr Koch. Schiller's been compromised. The net is closing. The Chileans are handing everyone connected to him over to the Israelis, who are asking very pointed questions. You're a link in that chain." Koch, bruised and terrified, was defiant. "I am a businessman. I know nothing." Miller dropped a file on the table, photographs of Schiller's victims obtained through clandestine channels. "This is what your business funds. The world is hunting these men. And they will take the middlemen too. You are a transaction in a ledger of blood.
They will hang you to get to him." The defiance crumbled into raw animal fear. Koch broke. He sobbed, offering names, accounts, everything. Then Rhine entered, playing the role of the higher authority. He dismissed Miller with a nod. He spoke to Koch in low, reasonable German. "My impulsive colleague is correct about the danger, but he is incorrect about your options. There is another path." He laid out the deal. Koch would continue his operations, but his primary client would now be Group Delta. He would use his network to move their people, their funds, and their acquired Nazi assets. In return, they would provide him with a new, ironclad identity, sanitize his past, and protect him from all pursuance, the Israelis, the Allies, even his former clients. They would not just employ him, they would become his sole and most powerful protector. "He's selling his soul," Miller said to Rhine later, on the villa's terrace, watching the city lights. "And we're buying it." "We're requisitioning a tool," Rhine replied, unmoved. "His soul was forfeit long before we found him. We're just putting the paperwork in order. This is how the game is played, Miller. You don't defeat monsters by refusing to enter the labyrinth. You defeat them by taking control of the maze." The first test of the new arrangement was an operation codenamed Parchment. A cache of aeronautical research documents from a hidden Peenemünde facility was located in a monastery in Austria within the Soviet zone. Using Koch's rat line in reverse, Group Delta smuggled out not a person, but a trunk of papers. The cost was paid from a Koch-controlled account in Montevideo. The documents arrived in Buenos Aires, were authenticated by a quietly recruited German scientist, and were on a military transport to Wright Field within a week. The entire operation was invisible, deniable, and funded by the very regime that had produced the research. As Miller signed the transfer manifest, he received a coded cable from Washington. It was notification of the establishment of a new, centralized intelligence agency to replace the OSS and other disparate groups. It was to be called the Central Intelligence Agency. The cable concluded with a personal note from a general whose name Miller recognized from Pentagon briefings. "Your unit's operational funding for the next fiscal year is approved under Annex Black. Continue the good work. The foundation is being laid." He showed the cable to Rhine. Rhine read it, a slow, thin smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of grim vindication. He looked at Miller, then at the bustling city below, a haven for ghosts they now commanded. "Congratulations, Jacob," Rhine said, his voice a quiet rasp against the Argentine night. "We're not just funding operations anymore. We've just become the hidden cornerstone of the CIA itself. The iron stash isn't a slush fund. It's the bedrock. Miller looked at his hands. They were clean. But he felt the indelible stain of the devil's ledger, the weight of the souls they had bargained with, and the terrifying architecture of the new world they were building in the shadows. The moral high ground of Frankfurt was a distant, fading memory. Here, in the labyrinth, they were no longer just hunters. They were becoming the architects, and the walls of their new creation were built with bricks of compromise, mortar of blackmail, and a foundation of pure, undiluted fear. Berlin, July 1947. The city was a schizophrenic wound, brutally cleaved by ideology. The air in the American sector still carried the sour tang of ruin, but now it was underscored by a new electric tension, the constant low-grade hum of the emerging Cold War. Checkpoints, barbed wire, and the suspicious glares of former allies now defined the landscape. Group Delta operated from a requisitioned former Abwehr safe house in the Grunewald forest. Its walls were thick, its location obscured by dense pines, a perfect metaphor for their work. Hidden, protected, and morally isolated. The target was no longer a bank account or a fugitive. It was the most sensitive asset on the original portfolio map, designated only as Wolfsfalle, Wolf's Trap. Years of painstaking work, the exploitation of Koch's network, and the breaking of lesser codes had finally revealed its nature. Wolfsfalle was not a stockpile of wealth or patents. It was a person. Dr. Otto von Falken, a genius physicist who had vanished from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in the spring of 1945. His specialty was the nascent, apocalyptic field of atomic isotope separation. Soviet intelligence believed him dead. The American Scientific Directorate had him listed as missing, presumed eliminated. But the portfolio's cryptic notes suggested otherwise. He was the ultimate intellectual asset, hidden away with the care of a holy relic, his knowledge a seed for a future arsenal. The problem was his guardian. Wolfsfalle was maintained by a network so elusive, so ruthless, it made Koch's rat line look amateurish. It was the inner circle of the former SS security apparatus, a ghost cell calling itself Kameradenwerk der Treue, the Fellowship of the Loyal. And their operational chief, the man who personally controlled access to Falken, was Obersturmbannführer, Retiaus, Ernst Stolz, a name that sent a visible chill through Elsa Werner when she deciphered it. He was the chief of security for the Oranienburg Research Complex, she said, her voice flat, a defense against memory. He is not a businessman or a banker. He is a true believer, a fanatic, and a psychopath with impeccable organizational skills. He will not break like Koch. He cannot be bought. Carter Rhine studied the grainy pre-war photo of Stolz, a handsome, sharp-featured man with empty eyes.
Everyone has a currency, he stated, but for the first time, Miller detected a flicker of uncertainty beneath the granite certainty. The stakes were now cosmic. Falken's knowledge could tip the strategic balance. Letting him fall into Soviet hands was unthinkable. But the price of reaching him, the plan, born in the Grunewald safe house, was the most audacious and repulsive yet. They would not attempt to snatch Falken, and Operation Stolz's network was surely prepared for. They would negotiate. They would offer Stolz and his fellowship the one thing they desired more than money: legitimacy, power, and a sanctioned purpose in the new order. "We cut a deal," Rhine outlined, the lamplight carving deep shadows in his face. "We offer Stolz and his inner circle complete amnesty via the Galen org." Reinhard Gehlen, the former Nazi intelligence chief for the Eastern Front, was now being groomed by the Americans to lead a new anti-Soviet intelligence service. It was an open secret and a festering moral wound. We offer them jobs, not hiding in Argentina, but positions of influence in the new West German intelligence apparatus. We give them back their uniforms in spirit, if not in name. In exchange, they deliver Falcon, and they become our dedicated, deniable anti-Soviet strike force on the continent. The room was silent. Lenz stopped typing. Shaw stopped cleaning his gun. Elsa closed her eyes. Miller felt a visceral revolt. You're proposing to recruit the SS, to put mass murderers on our payroll, to give them a future we're promising to build for decent people. Rhine turned on him, his patience gone. What is your alternative, Miller? A shootout in the Black Forest. We lose half the team. Stoltz kills Falcon as a contingency, and the Soviets, who are undoubtedly weeks behind us, scoop up the pieces? This isn't about justice. This is about survival. Stoltz's fanaticism is a weapon. We point it east. We control the trigger. That is the calculus. The meeting was held in a bombed-out brewery in the British sector, a place of echoing, dripping caverns. Stoltz arrived with two men, lean and watchful as wolves. He wore a civilian coat, but carried himself with rigid military poise. He was, disturbingly, the most composed man in the room. Rhine laid out the offer, cold and clear. Amnesty, employment, a war against the Bolsheviks, continued by other means. Stoltz listened, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his German precise, his tone chillingly reasonable. You misunderstand us, Herr Rhine. We do not seek to hide. We seek to continue. The fellowship is not a relic. It is a vanguard. You offer us a tool to fight your enemy. We accept. But we are not a tool to be discarded after use. We are to be partners. You get Dr. Falcon. We get a letter of understanding signed by your appropriate authority, guaranteeing our status. And we get operational control of our contributions. He was negotiating from strength. He had the ultimate prize. Miller watched, sickened, as Rhine, after a tense pause, nodded. Agreed. The exchange was set for 72 hours later at a remote farmhouse near the Bavarian town of Garmisch, straddling the fuzzy border between Allied and Soviet influence. It was a location that screamed trap, but in the hall of mirrors they inhabited, every location did. The drive south was a silent, tense procession in two unmarked cars. Miller rode with Shaw, who was methodically checking weapons. "This is where we pay the bill, Professor," Shaw muttered, not looking at him. "The real final bill." At the farmhouse, under a leaden sky, the two parties faced each other. Stoltz produced a frail, bewildered-looking man in spectacles. Dr. von Falken, a human secret wrapped in a shabby coat. Rhine produced a single sheet of paper on official stationery. A letter of understanding so classified it bore no real agency seal, only a code name. It was a pact with the devil, inscribed on government paper. The exchange happened in the farmyard mud. Falcon was walked over. The letter changed hands. Stoltz read it, nodded once, a faint, triumphant smile on his lips. He had just traded a scientist for a license to exist and to operate. It was the moment Miller had dreaded and yet hoped for. As Stoltz turned to leave, a shot rang out, shockingly loud in the mountain air, not from Shaw, not from Stoltz's men, from the tree line. A Soviet Spetsnaz team, tipped off by God knows what leak in the Byzantine intelligence labyrinth, had decided to crash the party. Their objective was clear: Deny the asset to the Americans at any cost. Chaos erupted. Shaw shoved Miller and the stumbling Falcon behind a stone wall. Gunfire raked the farmyard. Stoltz's men, true to their training and their new partnership, returned fire with brutal efficiency. It was a three-way firefight: Americans, Nazis, and Soviets. A grotesque tableau of the New World Order battling in a Bavarian cow pasture. Miller, pinned down, saw Rhine and Stoltz, back to back, behind an overturned wagon, firing in opposite directions. A perfect, unholy image of their alliance. He saw Elsa, across the yard, take a bullet in the shoulder and go down. He saw one of Stoltz's men cut down a Soviet soldier with a burst from his MP-40. Then, a new sound: the whine of approaching jeeps. American military police, alerted by the gunfire. The Soviet team, outnumbered, melted back into the forest. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence was filled with moans and the smell of cordite and blood. Stoltz looked at Rhine, his uniform smeared with mud and someone else's blood. He gave a curt, military nod. The partnership is sealed in blood, it seems. We will be in touch. He and his surviving man disappeared into the woods on the other side of the farmhouse, ghosts returning to the shadows, now with a signed invitation to haunt the future. The MP captain, a young man with a clean, confused face, ran up. "What in God's name is going on here? Who are those men?" Rhine, holstering his weapon, took out his credentials. CIA, Covert Asset Recovery. We were ambushed by Soviet infiltrators. These men, he gestured vaguely at the bodies of Stoltz's fallen comrades, were local auxiliaries. Brave men. See, they get a proper burial. The captain stared at the scene. The American woman being bandaged, the dazed scientist, the dead men in civilian clothes with military bearing. He didn't believe a word of it, but the acronym CIA was a new and potent magic word. He saluted, confused, and went to secure the perimeter. Miller helped Elsa to her feet. She was pale, her jaw clenched against the pain. She looked at him, her eyes holding a universe of despair. "We just won," she whispered hoarsely, "and we lost everything." Falcon was bundled into a car, his mind already in a cage of equations, oblivious to the hell that had been unleashed to possess him. Miller stood in the mud, looking at the blood mixing with the earth. He had come to Germany to unearth a hidden treasure. He had instead presided over a satanic baptism. They had secured the ultimate asset. But to do it, they had not just bargained with monsters. They had created a monster with two heads, one in Langley, one in the remnants of the SS, bound together by a piece of paper and the bloodshed in this field. The iron stash was no longer just money or patents. It was now a living, breathing entity, an unholy trinity of American ambition, Nazi methodology, and a cold, endless war. And Miller knew, with a certainty that froze his soul, that the devil they had just empowered would demand his due, again and again, forever. Washington, D.C., October 1949. The city was crisp, with the confidence of a new superpower. Gleaming government buildings rose like secular cathedrals, monuments to a future being written in triplicate and filed away. Jacob Miller's office was a small, windowless cubicle in the labyrinthine bowels of the newly constructed CIA headquarters in Foggy Bottom. It was a quiet, administrative purgatory. After Garmisch, there had been no medal, no promotion. There had been a debriefing so classified it was held in a soundproofed room with no stenographer. Then, a transfer, a vague title in the Directorate of Support, Financial Oversight Liaison. A desk job. It was, he understood, both his reward for success and his punishment for conscience. They had put him in charge of auditing the very darkness he had helped create. He was now the chief archivist of the unmentionable. The Iron Stash was no longer an operation. It was an institution. Its assets, the patents, the front companies, the secret bank accounts, were seamlessly woven into the agency's black budget, a hidden circulatory system financing everything from the bribing of Italian politicians to the procurement of surplus German V2 scientists. The Fellowship, under Ernst Stolz's cold leadership, had become the core of a new, deniable paramilitary wing operating along the Iron Curtain. Their methods were efficient, ruthless, and utterly without oversight. Miller saw their operational expense reports cross his desk. Payments for weapons caches in the Austrian Alps, for safe houses in Vienna, for local asset compensation. He initialed them. He was the bookkeeper for damnation. The conflict with Carter Rhine had calcified into a cold, professional silence. Rhine had been promoted, now a deputy director of plans, the architect of covert action. He was a star in the firmament of the new CIA, his methods vindicated by results. Miller was his ghost, a living reminder of the original sin. The catalyst came in the form of a slim, innocuous file. It was a routine audit of a research grant to a small aviation firm in California. The grant was for advanced aerodynamic studies, but one of the patent numbers referenced in the technical annex made Miller's blood run cold. It was from the very first list he had seen in the Frankfurt Bank, a German patent for swept-wing design. It had been acquired, refiled by an American shell corporation, and was now the cornerstone of a secret, cutting-edge fighter jet project. The science was real. The progress was undeniable, and the foundation was a stolen, unacknowledged corpse. That night, in his tiny Georgetown apartment, Miller made his decision. He would not expose the truth. That was a suicide note that would accomplish nothing. He would enshrine it. He would create a record so complete, so undeniable, and so dangerous that it would become its own form of power, a silent, eternal safeguard. He called it the Ledger. Using his access, his memory, and the quiet, unsanctioned help of Arthur Lentz, who, drowning in whiskey and remorse, saw it as a form of penance, Miller began to compile, not just a list of assets, but the full story. Every transaction from Zurich, every blackmail of Dr. Vogel, the creation of the rat line through Koch, the blood-soaked pact with Stolz. He attached original documents, photographs of the dead in Garmisch, transcripts of the negotiation with Stolz, and the damning Letter of Understanding. He traced the flow of Nazi patents into American aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and electronics. He named names, linked accounts, and mapped the entire hideous genealogy of the Iron Stash, from its birth in the ashes of Frankfurt to its current life as the beating black heart of the Cold War machine. It took him 6 months. It was an act of quiet, meticulous treason. He worked only at night, on a typewriter not connected to any government system. The final document was over 500 pages thick. It was not an accusation. It was a testament, a monument to the victory that had cost them their soul. He made one copy on microfilm, sealed in a stainless steel cylinder. The other, the paper original, he placed in a heavy fireproof case. He requested a meeting with Carter Rhine. It was held in Rhine's new corner office with a view of the Potomac. Rhine was older, harder, encased in the armor of supreme utility. "Jacob," he said without warmth, "to what do I owe the pleasure? A discrepancy in the books?" No discrepancies, sir, Miller said, his voice steady. He placed the fireproof case on Ryan's immaculate desk. I've come to submit a final comprehensive audit of Project Iron Stash. All assets, all operations, all partnerships, from inception to present day. Ryan's eyes flickered to the case, then back to Miller. A wary, predatory stillness settled over him. He opened the case. He read the first page, then flipped to a random section in the middle. His face, usually an impenetrable mask, paled. He saw his own signature next to Stoltz's. He saw the chain of command leading to the very top of the agency. He saw the unvarnished, meticulously documented truth. He closed the case. The sound was like a tomb sealing. "This is not an audit," Ryan said, his voice dangerously low. "This is a weapon of mutual assured destruction." "That's correct," Miller replied. "The microfilm copy is in a safety deposit box in Zurich. The bank is different. The lawyer is different. Instructions for its release in the event of my death, or my disappearance, or any unexplained termination of my employment are with 3 separate parties who know only their individual piece of the puzzle." The air in the room turned to ice. This was the ultimate, unforgivable transgression. Not whistleblowing, but blackmail from within. The student had finally learned the master's lesson too well. "You think this protects you?" Ryan hissed, leaning forward. "You think this makes you safe?" "I think it makes the truth safe," Miller corrected him. "It ensures that this creation of ours is never forgotten, that it can never be easily replicated without someone, someday, understanding the full cost. It's a containment vessel for the moral hazard. You built a perfect, silent machine. I have just given it a voice, on a very long delay." Ryan stared at him, a mixture of fury and a terrible, grudging respect. He had created Miller in the shadow world's image, and now that creation had turned to hold up a mirror. The reflection was monstrous. "What do you want?" Ryan finally asked, each word a chip of stone. "My resignation, accepted quietly with a pension, a clean, boring academic future, and your personal unbreakable guarantee that Elsa Werner and Arthur Lentz are left alone. They retire, they fade away, they are left in peace. And in exchange, the ledger sleeps, the microfilm sleeps, the story remains buried. I become the lock on the vault, a living lock." Ryan leaned back, looking out at the gleaming city. He was silent for a long time, weighing the absolute certainty of ruin against the price of one man's silence. It was the same calculus he had always used, just with a different currency. "Agreed," he said, the word final. "You will have your quiet life. They will have their peace. But understand this, Jacob. You are not burying this. You are becoming its permanent custodian. You will carry it with you every day. You will look at every advance, every new plane in the sky, every new medicine, and you will see the ghost in the machine. That is your sentence. To know." Miller stood. "I've known since Garmisch. This is just making it official." He walked out of the office, out of the gleaming headquarters, and into the autumn sun. He was a free man. He was also a walking tomb. Epilogue, 1955. Jacob Miller, now a tenured professor of economic history at a small New England college, sat in a sun-drenched common room. The morning paper lay on the table. The headline spoke of a new American turbojet, a marvel of engineering that shattered speed records. A grainy photo showed its sleek, swept-wing design. A student, bright and eager, tapped the article. "Isn't it amazing, Professor? How fast we're progressing. It's like the future is just happening." Miller looked at the photo. He saw not just metal and ambition. He saw a dusty office in Frankfurt. He saw the fear in Dr. Vogel's eyes. He saw the blood in the Bavarian mud. He saw the cold smile of Ernst Stolz. He saw the fireproof case in Rhein's office. He took a slow sip of coffee, the taste both bitter and familiar. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet, a whisper lost in the rustle of other newspapers, in the optimistic chatter of the bright, young, unknowing world. "It's amazing. It truly is." He folded the paper, placing it carefully aside. The ghost in the machine did not stir. It slept. And he, its keeper, continued his quiet, endless vigil. The operation was over. The iron stash was complete. It was no longer a fund or a file. It was the world they had built, and he was condemned to live in it, remembering every single terrible brick. The forever vault was not in Zurich. It was in him. And the ledger, the full and terrible truth, was now his life sentence.